I want to pause here. I made the decision to attend my husband's charity art auction downtown, but when I walked into the exhibition hall and saw the featured collection, I dropped my champagne glass on the marble floor. The crystal shattered into 1,000 pieces, just like my 30-year marriage was about to. Because hanging on those pristine white walls, illuminated by gallery lights, were 15 paintings from my personal collection. The collection I'd been building since before I met Richard, the pieces he'd told me 6 months ago that he'd donated to a children's hospital charity auction. The artwork I'd spent 3 decades carefully curating, each piece chosen with love, each one holding a memory. And standing beneath my favorite impressionist landscape, laughing with champagne in hand, was a woman I'd never seen before. A woman wearing a dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent. A woman whose hand my husband was holding. Let me back up. My name is Eleanor, and until that Friday evening in October, I thought I had a good life. Not perfect, but good. I'm 62 years old, and for the past 28 years, I've owned and operated the Riverside Gallery in downtown Portland. Before that, I worked as an assistant curator at the Portland Art Museum, which is where I met Richard when he came in for a corporate event. He was 34, a rising attorney at a prestigious firm. I was 32, passionate about art, and naive enough to believe that love conquered all. We married within a year. Our daughter Claire was born 3 years later, then our son James 2.5 years after that. For 30 years, we built what I thought was a partnership. I ran my gallery, nurturing artists and building relationships with collectors. Richard climbed the ladder at his firm, eventually making senior partner. We bought a beautiful home in the West Hills with a view of Mount Hood. We raised 2 wonderful children. We attended charity events, hosted dinner parties, took family vacations to Europe where I could visit museums and galleries. But something had shifted over the past year. Richard had become distant. He'd always worked long hours, but lately he was barely home. When he was home, he was on his phone constantly. He'd started going to the gym, bought new clothes, became particular about his appearance in a way he never had been before. At 64, he was suddenly concerned about looking young. I'd noticed other things too. Money disappearing from our joint savings account. When I asked about it, Richard said it was for business investments. The late-night phone calls he'd take in his study with the door closed. The weekends he claimed he needed to work, but came home smelling like expensive perfume. I'm not stupid. I've been married for 3 decades. I know the signs. But I'm also not confrontational by nature. I believe in trust, in giving people the benefit of the doubt. I told myself I was being paranoid, that Richard was just going through a midlife crisis, that it would pass. Then came the conversation about my art collection. It was a Tuesday evening in April. I came home from the gallery to find Richard in the living room, looking at the walls where several of my favorite pieces hung. We also had artwork throughout the house and a temperature-controlled storage room in the basement where I kept the rest of my collection. "Eleanor," he said, not looking at me, "I've been thinking about the art collection." I set down my bag. "What about it?" "It's worth quite a bit now, isn't it?" "You've been collecting for what, 35 years?" 37, I corrected. I'd started collecting in my mid-20s, buying pieces I loved from emerging artists when I could barely afford them. Over the decades, some of those artists had become quite successful. My collection was now worth close to $2 million. "Have you ever thought about doing something philanthropic with it?" Richard asked. "Donating pieces to charity auctions? It would be a significant tax write-off." I felt uneasy, but I couldn't pinpoint why. "Some pieces, perhaps. But Richard, this is my collection. Each piece has meaning to me." I know. He finally looked at me, and his smile was warm, the smile I'd fallen in love with 30 years ago. "I'm not suggesting we donate everything, just a few pieces. There's a children's hospital benefit auction coming up. I thought it might be nice to contribute something meaningful." I thought about it. A children's hospital seemed like a worthy cause, and Richard was right that it would be a good tax deduction. "Which pieces were you thinking? Maybe we could go through the collection together this weekend? You could tell me about each piece, and we could decide together." That weekend, we spent Saturday afternoon in the storage room. I pulled out pieces, shared the stories behind each one. The small oil painting I'd bought at a street fair in Paris on our honeymoon. the abstract piece I'd purchased from a student artist who was now represented by galleries in New York and London. The landscape that reminded me of the Oregon coast where we'd taken the kids every summer. Richard listened, made notes on his phone, nodded thoughtfully. We selected 15 pieces together. Not my absolute favorites, but pieces I could part with for a good cause. Richard said he'd handle the donation paperwork and arrange for the pieces to be picked up and delivered to the auction house. 2 weeks later, a moving company came. Professional art handlers, properly insured. They carefully packed and loaded the 15 paintings. I signed the release forms Richard had prepared. He kissed my cheek and said, "You're doing a wonderful thing, Eleanor. These pieces will help raise significant money for sick children." I felt good about it. Virtuous, even. That was 6 months ago. Over the summer, Richard became even more absent. More late nights, more weekend work obligations, more mysterious phone calls. Our daughter Claire called me one Saturday in July. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something." My stomach dropped. A mother knows that tone. "What is it, sweetheart?" There was a long pause. "Never mind. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have called. It's not my place." "Claire, you're frightening me. What's wrong?" I love you, Mom. You know that, right?" "Of course I do. Claire, please tell me what's going on." But she'd already hung up. I tried calling her back 3 times. She didn't answer. I called James, but he said he didn't know what Claire was talking about. Though now, looking back, I think he knew. I think they both knew, and they were torn about what to do. When do you tell your mother that her husband is betraying her? How do you break that kind of news? I tried to ask Richard if something was wrong with Claire. He barely looked up from his phone. "She's fine, Eleanor. You worry too much." In September, Richard told me about a business dinner he needed to attend. A networking event for senior attorneys and potential clients. "Very boring," he said. "You'd hate it. Just glad-handing and business talk." I'd been to dozens of these over the years. He was right that I usually found them tedious. "Okay," I said. "What night?" "Friday the 20th. I made a note in my calendar, planning to have dinner with my friend Margaret that evening instead. But on Wednesday the 18th, Margaret called to cancel. Her daughter was having a baby, and she was flying to Boston to be there for the birth. I was happy for her, of course, but it left my Friday evening open. That afternoon, I was at the gallery when my phone chimed with a notification. A Facebook event invitation from the Portland Arts Foundation. An evening of elegance. Charity art auction benefiting Portland arts education programs. The date caught my eye. Friday, October 20th. This Friday. I clicked on the event details. The auction was being held at the Sentinel Hotel downtown. There would be cocktails, live music, and a silent auction of curated artwork. Proceeds would benefit arts education in Portland public schools. I almost scrolled past it. Then I saw one of the featured lots in the preview images. It was a painting I recognized. One of the pieces from my collection. The abstract piece by the artist who was now represented in New York and London. My hands started shaking. I clicked through more preview images. There was another piece I recognized. And another. I counted 5 of my paintings in the preview photos alone. But wait. Richard had said those pieces went to a children's hospital auction 6 months ago, in April. I sat there at my desk, staring at my phone, trying to make sense of it. Maybe the hospital had donated them to another auction. Maybe there was some arrangement between charities. But that didn't make sense. If the pieces had been auctioned 6 months ago, they would have been sold to private collectors. They wouldn't still be available for another auction. Unless they'd never been auctioned at all. Unless Richard had lied to me. I looked up the event details again. The auction was hosted by the Portland Arts Foundation, with a reception starting at 7 p.m., black tie optional. Richard's business dinner was Friday at 7 p.m. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I called the gallery assistant and told her I wasn't feeling well, that I needed to leave early. Then I drove home and went straight to the storage room in the basement. The room was climate-controlled, equipped with proper lighting and archival storage. I kept meticulous records of every piece in my collection, with photographs, provenance documentation, and insurance information. I pulled out my inventory list and started checking. The 15 pieces Richard and I had selected for donation. According to my records, they'd been picked up on May 8th by Metropolitan Art Transport, a company Richard had hired. I grabbed my laptop and searched for Metropolitan Art Transport. The company existed, but when I called their number, I got a voicemail saying they were closed for the day and would reopen Monday morning. I left a message asking for confirmation of a pickup and delivery from our address in May. Then I started searching online for the Children's Hospital benefit auction Richard had mentioned. I couldn't find any record of it. No announcements, no websites, no social media posts. There had been a hospital gala in May, but it was a dinner event, not an auction, and there was no mention of donated artwork. I felt sick. I went upstairs to Richard's study. He kept it locked when he wasn't home, but I knew where he hid the spare key. Inside a fake book on the shelf in the hall, a book titled Trial Procedures in Civil Litigation. Richard thought it was clever. He didn't know I'd discovered it years ago when I was looking for a book to read. I unlocked the study and went inside. Richard's desk was neat, organized. His computer was password protected, but I knew the password. Our wedding anniversary, 092794. It didn't work. He'd changed it. I felt a coldness settle in my chest. In 30 years of marriage, Richard had never changed his computer password. He'd always said he had nothing to hide from me. I tried a few other combinations. His birthday, the kids' birthdays, nothing worked. I turned to his file cabinets. Also locked. But I knew Richard kept spare keys in the top drawer of his desk, tucked into a leather box that had been his father's. I found them and unlocked the first cabinet. Inside were normal things: client files, billing records, legal documents, nothing unusual. The second cabinet was more interesting. There were financial documents that I didn't recognize, statements from accounts I'd never heard of, withdrawals from our savings account that totaled nearly $300,000 over the past year. $300,000. I felt dizzy. I sat down in Richard's leather desk chair and tried to process what I was seeing. Where had that money gone? I kept digging, found a folder labeled Victoria Chen, Art Consultant. Inside were appraisals of artwork, my artwork, the 15 pieces from my collection, professionally appraised at current market value. The total came to just over $1.8 million. Clipped to the appraisals was a contract, an agreement between Richard Sullivan and Victoria Chen for the consignment and sale of fine art pieces. Victoria would handle the sale of the artwork, taking a 15% commission. The contract was dated April 15th, 2 days before Richard had suggested I donate pieces to charity. He'd never intended to donate my artwork. He'd planned to sell it, and he'd forged my signature on the contract. I sat there for a long time, holding that contract in my hands, reading my own forged signature over and over. The handwriting was good. Richard had clearly practiced, but I could see the differences. The way he made the capital E in Eleanor, the loop in the R of my last name. My husband had been planning this for months, maybe longer. I took photos of everything with my phone. The financial statements, the withdrawals, the contract, the appraisals. I put everything back exactly as I'd found it, locked the cabinets, locked the study, and replaced the key in the fake book. Then I went to our bedroom and lay down on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Richard came home at 8:30. I heard him moving around downstairs, heard him come up the stairs. He paused at the bedroom door. "Eleanor? Are you all right? You're home early." I didn't move. I wasn't feeling well. He came in, set his briefcase down. "Do you need anything? Have you eaten?" "I'm not hungry." "Should I call the doctor?" "No." I finally looked at him. This man I'd been married to for 30 years. This stranger. "I'll be fine." He studied me for a moment, and I wondered if he could tell. If he knew that I knew. But then he nodded. "Get some rest. I have some work to do in my study." He left, and I heard the study door close. Later, I heard his voice, low and murmuring. A phone call. I wondered if he was talking to Victoria Chen. I wondered how long they'd been together. I wondered how many lies I'd believed. The next day, Thursday, I went to the gallery as usual. I was good at putting on a professional face. I'd been doing it for decades, but inside, I was planning. I called a locksmith and arranged for him to come to the house Friday morning while Richard was at work. I had all the locks changed, the front door, the back door, the garage. I kept one set of new keys and left another with my friend Margaret, who was back from Boston. I called my attorney, David Chen. Yes, the same last name as Victoria. Portland's Chinese-American community isn't that large. It turned out David was Victoria's uncle, and he was furious when I told him what was happening. Eleanor, this is fraud, forgery. He could be disbarred for this. I know. But first, I want to stop the auction. Those pieces are mine. I never gave permission to sell them. David made some calls. By Thursday afternoon, he'd filed an emergency injunction preventing the sale of any artwork from my collection. He'd also filed for a formal appraisal of all marital assets and a freeze on all joint accounts. Friday's going to be interesting, he said. Friday morning, I got dressed carefully. I chose a black silk dress I'd been saving for a special occasion. I'd bought it on our last trip to Paris 2 years ago, when I still thought we were happy. Pearl earrings that had been my mother's. My good heels. Richard left for work at 8 a.m. The locksmith arrived at 9. By 10, the locks were all changed. I spent the afternoon at the gallery, but I couldn't focus. I kept checking my phone, waiting for Richard to call, but he didn't. At 5:30, I drove downtown to the Sentinel Hotel. The valets were already busy with early arrivals. I handed over my keys and walked into the elegant lobby. The auction was being held in the grand ballroom. I followed the signs and the well-dressed crowd. At the entrance, I gave my name to the woman with the guest list. She frowned. I'm sorry, I don't see an Eleanor Sullivan on the list. Really? My husband Richard Sullivan should be here. He's one of the organizers. Her frown deepened. Actually, I have Richard Sullivan registered, but his +1 is listed as Victoria Chen. There it was. Spoken out loud. Confirmed. I see, I said calmly. Well, I'm his wife. His actual wife. So I suppose there's been a mistake. The woman's eyes went wide. She stammered something about checking with the event coordinator. I didn't wait. I walked past her into the ballroom. The space was elegant. Round tables with white linens and floral centerpieces, a stage at one end with a podium and screens for displaying auction lots, waiters circulating with champagne and appetizers, and along every wall, artwork on display. My artwork. I took a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and started walking slowly around the room, looking at each piece. The landscape from the Oregon coast, the abstract piece from the emerging artist, the oil painting from Paris. All 15 pieces from my collection, hung with professional lighting and little brass plaques with lot numbers. Eleanor? I turned. It was Margaret, looking shocked. What are you doing here? Same thing as you, apparently. Supporting the arts. I took a sip of champagne. Did you know about this? Know about what? That Richard was selling my collection. Her face went pale. What? Eleanor, no. I just saw the event posted on Facebook and thought I'd come support it. I didn't know. Your collection? I gestured around the room. 15 pieces. He told me he was donating them to charity. Instead, he's been selling them through some art consultant named Victoria Chen. Oh my God. Yes. That's one way to put it. A man's voice came over the speakers. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be starting our program in just a few minutes. Please find your seats. I watched people moving toward the tables, and then I saw him. Richard, in a tuxedo, looking distinguished and handsome, and next to him, a woman in a red dress. Young, beautiful, elegant. Her hand was on his arm. They were laughing together. Victoria Chen. I started walking toward them. Margaret grabbed my arm. Eleanor, wait. What are you going to do? What I should have done months ago. I walked up to them, my heels clicking on the polished floor. Richard saw me when I was about 10 feet away. His face went white. Eleanor. His voice cracked. What are you doing here? Attending a charity auction. I looked at the woman in red. You must be Victoria Chen. She looked at Richard. Confused. Richard? I'm Eleanor Sullivan, I said pleasantly. Richard's wife. We've been married for 30 years. How long have you two been together? Victoria stepped back, her face flushing. Wife? Richard, you said you were divorced. Funny, I said. I don't remember signing any divorce papers, though I did see my forged signature on a consignment contract for my art collection. Richard grabbed my arm. Eleanor, let's talk about this privately. I pulled away from him. No, we're going to talk about it right here, In front of your girlfriend and all these nice people who came to bid on my artwork. The artwork you stole from me. People were staring now. Conversations were stopping. The room was getting quiet. I didn't steal anything, Richard said, his voice low and angry. That collection is community property. Actually, it's not. I started that collection 7 years before I met you, and I kept meticulous records proving provenance and ownership. My attorney has those records, along with the contract where you forged my signature. The man who'd been speaking into the microphone hurried over. Is there a problem? Yes, I said. There's a problem. The artwork being auctioned tonight was taken from my personal collection without my permission. My attorney filed an injunction this morning preventing the sale of any of these pieces. The man looked horrified. He turned to Richard. Is this true? Richard was sweating now. It's a misunderstanding. My wife and I had an agreement. We had no agreement, I interrupted. You told me you were donating these pieces to a children's hospital charity auction. Instead, you've been planning to sell them and pocket the money, while emptying our joint savings account. While having an affair with Miss Chen here. Victoria was crying now. I didn't know. Richard, you said you were divorced. You said the artwork was yours. You said... He lied, I said gently. To both of us. The event coordinator was on his phone, speaking urgently. Security guards were approaching, and in the crowd I saw faces I recognized. Other attorneys from Richard's firm, clients, colleagues, all witnessing this public implosion. Richard tried one more time. Eleanor, please, let's go somewhere and talk about this rationally. Rationally? I laughed, and I heard the edge of hysteria in my own voice. You want to talk rationally? After you spent months planning to steal from me? After you lied about donating to charity? After you brought your mistress to an event where you were selling my life's work? I set down my champagne glass on the nearest table. Goodbye, Richard. Don't bother coming home. I changed the locks. I walked out of that ballroom with my head high, leaving behind my husband, his mistress, my artwork, and 30 years of marriage. Margaret caught up with me in the lobby. Eleanor, oh my God. Are you okay? No. I felt tears starting finally. But I will be. She drove me home. We sat in my kitchen and drank an entire bottle of wine while I cried and raged and grieved. At some point, my phone started ringing. Richard, calling over and over. I didn't answer. At midnight, there was pounding on the door. Richard, demanding to be let in. I called the police. They came and explained to him that this was my house, that I had the right to change the locks, and that he needed to leave. He finally did. The next few weeks were chaos. David Chen worked with the Portland Arts Foundation to return my artwork. The foundation was mortified and cooperative. They'd had no idea the pieces were fraudulently consigned. Victoria Chen filed a complaint with the Oregon State Bar against Richard. As did I. She'd been used just as much as I had. Richard had told her he was divorced, that the artwork was his to sell. He'd promised her a serious relationship. He'd taken her to expensive dinners and on weekend trips, all paid for with money from our joint account. David filed for divorce on my behalf, citing fraud, adultery, and financial misconduct. He also filed a civil suit for the $300,000 Richard had taken from our savings. Richard tried to fight it. He hired an expensive attorney. He claimed the art collection was community property, that he had every right to sell it. He claimed I was mentally unstable, that I'd been making irrational financial decisions. He even tried to claim that I'd given him permission to manage the collection. But I had proof. My meticulous records showing I'd owned every piece before our marriage, the forged signature on the consignment contract, the financial records showing he'd emptied our accounts without telling me, the testimony from Victoria that he'd lied about being divorced, and I had something else. Our children. Claire called me 2 weeks after the auction. Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have told you months ago. I saw them together at a restaurant in August. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to believe it was true. It's not your fault, sweetheart. Dad called me. He's saying terrible things about you. That you're trying to ruin him. That you're being vindictive. She paused. But I know the truth. James and I both do. We're on your side, Mom. Whatever you need. It meant everything to hear that. The divorce took 6 months. In the end, Richard lost his senior partner position at the firm. The Bar Association suspended his license, pending a full investigation. He was required to pay back the $300,000, plus legal fees, plus half the value of my art collection as punitive damages. I got the house, the gallery, and my art collection. Richard got a rented apartment and a tarnished reputation. James helped me hang the artwork again. We put some pieces back in their original spots and found new places for others. Claire helped me reorganize my gallery, planning a new exhibition. On a Saturday morning in May, a year after this all began, I was at the gallery preparing for an opening. The theme was resilience. We were featuring women artists over 50 who had overcome personal challenges. The door chimed. I looked up to see an older woman, maybe 70, with silver hair and bright eyes. She was looking at a painting by a 68-year-old artist who'd started painting after her divorce. "This is beautiful," the woman said. "What's the story behind it?" I walked over and told her about the artist, about how she'd left a difficult marriage at 65 and discovered painting as a way to process her emotions. How her work had evolved from dark, angry pieces to these luminous landscapes full of hope. The woman listened intently. When I finished, she said, "I needed to hear that story today. I'm 69. I just left my husband of 45 years. Everyone thinks I'm crazy, that I'm too old to start over." I took her hand. "You're not too old. You're never too old." She bought the painting. It was the first sale of the exhibition. That evening, I locked up the gallery and drove home. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt peaceful. I made myself dinner, poured a glass of wine, and sat on the back deck watching the sun set behind the trees. My phone buzzed. A text from Claire. "Dad wants to meet for dinner. Says he wants to apologize. I told him only if he apologizes to you first. Love you, Mom." I smiled and texted back, "Love you too, sweetheart." I didn't know if Richard would ever truly apologize. I didn't know if I would ever forgive him, even if he did. But I knew one thing for certain. I didn't need his apology to move forward. I didn't need his validation or his remorse. I'd already moved on. I'd already built a new life, one where I wasn't living in the shadow of someone else's lies and betrayals. At 62 years old, I discovered something important. It's never too late to choose yourself. It's never too late to stand up and say, "No more." It's never too late to take back your power and rebuild your life on your own terms. That Friday evening in October, when I walked into that ballroom and saw my artwork on the walls, when I confronted my husband in front of everyone, when I walked out with my head high, that was the moment everything changed. That was the moment I stopped being a victim and became a survivor. And if I could do it at 62, after 30 years of marriage, then I believe anyone can. Age is just a number. It's never too late to start over. It's never too late to choose the truth, even when it shatters everything you thought you knew. Sometimes the truth doesn't break you. Sometimes it sets you free.